Thursday, 11/17 to 18. Thursday, 11/18, 2010. God of Understanding, lesson number 2.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Judaism and Recovery. We're studying God of Understanding by Rabbi Shais Taub, Jewish Spirituality and Recovery from Addiction. Last week was the first week. We studied the introduction, Jews, Addiction, and Recovery. And today we are in the middle of chapter 2 of the introduction, Spiritual or Religious. We gave a little history of how Alcoholics Anonymous started. We said that although we're going to mention in this book the fellowship of AA, but really we're referring to all fellowships that are spiritually based, recovery based, on the 12 steps. So let's go down on the bottom of page 18. A spiritual program. So we know that the 12 steps became widely popular, even world famous, at least in name, if not in content. But what is the program all about?
More value.
What does it do? Or more aptly stated, what does it say ought to be done? Because as we know, the program doesn't do anything to us. It's not a magic pill. It's not a place that we go and we do a rapid detox or all the other things that they do to us. It's actually something that we do, and it tells us what to do. It is suggested that we do. Someone said, the 12 steps are a suggested program of recovery, and if you jump off an airplane, it's suggested you have a parachute. It's a suggestion. But hey, try it without it and see what happens. People say, I had to switch therapists. This therapist wasn't working out for me. Well, the therapist is not supposed to work for you. You're supposed to work. And the therapist is there to support your work. If you're not willing to do the work, then there's no other therapist in town that's going to work out for you. Okay, so that's clear. So we want to find out what the program says. What does the program of recovery say we ought to be doing? This is an introduction, and we have already said we would be terse. So in a single word, the program is about spirituality. And we're not going to define spirituality right at this second. We know that if there's 10 rabbis in the room, there's 10 interpretation of what spirituality means. Only thing that we're going to say in this chapter is that spirituality is not necessarily connected to religion, which means there could be religion without spirituality, unfortunately. There has been plenty of spirituality without religion. But they're also not contradictory to each other. There's a way to practice both religion in a spiritual way and spirituality in a religious way. In chapter 1, we will speak at length about the nature of addiction and why exactly a spiritual solution is uniquely effective. Once we understand the malady, and we will understand that it's a spiritual malady, we will understand why, specifically in this case, spirituality is the answer. However, suffices to say that for now, that the most basic premise of the 12-step programs is that spiritual consciousness attained by taking prescribed actions has a sufficiently powerful effect on the human psyche to bring about the kind of radical personality shift necessary for relieving the most acute symptoms of addiction, allowing a person thereby to function contentedly in sobriety. No run-ins. Run-ons. Which means that there is spirituality here, is not feel-good based, is not even meditation based, and also not talk-based. This spirituality is action-based. There's no chapter, we read that in one of the stories a couple of weeks ago, there's no chapter into thinking or into talking. There's a chapter into action. So, if there is a spiritual consciousness that's attained by taking action, then that spiritual consciousness allows us to become a different kind of person. And when I am a different kind of person, it does two things to me. First of all, it relieves me from my addiction, number one. And number two, it allows me to live a sober life, happily, without being miserable. Okay? So, that's the long sentence that describes how the program works. To put it simply, the 12 steps help people get better by teaching them how to be spiritual. Not teaching them to be spiritual, but how to be spiritual. And how here is a program of action. So in summary, just so there will be no mistaking, let's recap. The 12 steps outline a spiritual approach to treating addiction as opposed to a medical approach, as opposed to a psychiatric approach. Members of 12-step groups are as such spiritual practitioners. If I choose this form of treatment for addiction, I will become a person who practices spirituality. I'm not going to become a spiritual person. I'm going to become a spiritual practitioner. I might become a spiritual person eventually. That will come later. First, I'm going to become a spiritual practitioner. The modern social phenomenon known today as recovery is a spiritual movement. Now the author here goes and pokes a little bit at other forms of recovery. Let's read. At this point, a brief disclaimer would be in order. Although throughout this book and the world at large, the word recovery is used synonymously with the 12 steps, it should be noted that not all recovery is spiritual. There are non-12-step approaches to recovering from addiction, but these are, and forgive me for sounding glib, somewhat like sugar-free candy or non-dairy creamer. They exist. They may even enjoy some popularity or fill some need, but their very name classifies them as a digression from the original, an alternative to the norm. And for some people need that. Okay? So there's some people who successfully recover through non-spiritual programs. The majority of people who live sober and happily sober are following a spiritual program. When people make a point of mentioning that a particular approach to recovery is non-12 steps, what they usually mean is non-spiritual. That's what they're trying to say. I am not taking spiritual actions for my recovery. I'm taking other actions. Logical actions, rational recovery, medical actions, some magic pills, or other non-spiritual programs. Whereas if they talk about recovery without qualifying the word at all, what they implicitly mean is a spiritual approach. Got that? So in this book, when we talk about recovery, we mean recovery through a 12-step program, which is a spiritual practice. Religion and recovery. Now, as one could well imagine, any program for living that is so fundamentally spiritual in nature would be apt to draw a great deal of scrutiny, even misgivings, as to what its true beliefs might actually be. We become very suspicious as soon as someone mentions God or spirituality. All of our alarm bells go off. I get an email from this guy. He says, Rabbi, God sent me to you. I'm like, beeped. I don't take referrals from God. I don't take referrals from God. I'm very suspicious when someone says, God sent me. So your therapist sent me, your rabbi sent me, but if God sent you? So every time someone says spiritual, godly, religion, we think cult, we think herd-like mentality, we think religion, we think crutches, etc. Now, there's other, when we open the Somerset Collection catalog that just came in the mail today, no one starts questioning why this specific skirt is in fashion or non-skirt. No one questions that. No one scrutinizes as much what we wear, what we drive, or what's acceptable as socially acceptable as what people scrutinize when people say spirituality. Actually, a recent study shows that atheists know much more about religion than religious people. Because they study it so much so they can rip it apart. The religious people don't have to study that much. They just believe in it. So obviously, when people say we have a spiritual program, what is the hidden agenda? That's what everyone wants to know. Now, some people, we're going to read, some people say the hidden agenda is Christianity. Some people say the hidden agenda is a cult. There's a cult called 12 Steps. There's orange papers, you go online and look them up, about how some people view this as a dangerous cult. Over the years, there seems to have arisen two main concerns about the program, and they happen to be mutually exclusive of each other. The program is suspected either of trying to start its own religion, or a cult, or a sect, or of trying to repackage an old one. Christianity, to be specific. Of course, either proposition would be troubling for Jews, that's us, as well as many other people, perhaps even Christians. Christians don't want their Christianity to be repackaged as the 12 Steps, and they don't want other people to start a new religion. Now, I like to say, when people tell me, 12 Steps are Christian, I say, who cares? The Christians stole everything from us. So what's the big deal? If the 12 Steps are Christian, they're probably Jewish too. But that's not the point. It's a little like the discussion about church, separation of church and state, which does not appear directly in the First Amendment, but it's an interpretation of the Supreme Court and is now adopted as the main interpretation of the First Amendment. But there's a wall between the state and the church, which means that the state is not allowed to adopt one religion as their only religion. It doesn't mean that in a state we can't practice our religion. Freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So the same concept appears over here. There is no problem at all between spirituality and religion. There's no problem at all between the spirituality of the 12 Steps and any religion. But every single religion is welcome in the spiritual program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as we're going to see. Part 3 of this book is entirely devoted to taking a close look at the steps to see whether they present a consistent theological stance, and if so, how we can understand this position in the light of Jewish teachings about God. And if you're smart enough, you understand that if the guy ended up writing a whole book about it, his conclusion is probably that there is a way to reconcile the 12 steps with the Jewish religion. All right, we're going to assume that. But once again, for the purpose of this introduction, Let's not engage in an analysis of the steps for now, and just respond to the general characterization of the program as being either religious or pseudo-religious in nature. So this is a characterization of the program, which means people who don't like the program like to characterize the program as a religious program, thereby saying this is why we should not practice this program. Let's start with the facts. It's a matter of historical record that both of the two original AA co-founders, Bill W. and Dr. Bob Smith, had at one time belonged to an evangelical Christian movement known as the Oxford Group, and were strongly influenced by many of its basic ideas, which is, you can't just be religious in ideas, you have to practice it in your everyday life. That was the basic tenet of the Oxford Group. And if your beliefs don't change your actions, then there's a question about your beliefs. Some of the other stuff that Oxford came up with. And that's why in the beginning, people used the Oxford Group to recover from alcoholism. It worked for them because it was a belief system that had actions attached to it. And it had a great impact on how people lived their daily lives. So if someone had that in their lives, they were able to live without the addiction. On the other hand, it is also a fact that AA as a whole separated itself from this group before the publication of the Big Book. They wanted to be single-minded and specifically about recovery from alcoholism and not invest themselves in any other human problems that the Oxford Group was trying to address at the time. Another point worthy of consideration is that while the Big Book certainly uses what many would consider typically religious language, especially the word God is a capital God with a capital G, is widespread among the pages of the Big Book, it never once endorses a particular faith. And sure, sometimes in AA meetings, certain people talk about finding salvation in certain people or things, but that's not what it says in the Big Book. In fact, it seems that the book actually goes to great lengths, abnormally so, considering the time and place it was written, that is America in the 1930s, to is true, favoring any particular religion, or even making assumptions about the religious affiliations of its members. For example, note this passage from the Big Book that speaks about setting aside time for daily prayer and meditation. Page 87, and quote, "If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. In addition to the prayer that we do in step 11, if our religious denomination requires us to pray in the morning, we do that also. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers from a religion which emphasize the principle we have been discussing." So you can go and look for a Christian prayer, a Muslim prayer, a Jewish prayer that reflects the ideas of the steps and memorize them and incorporate them in your recovery prayers. There are many helpful books also, other books besides the books of Alcoholics Anonymous. Suggestion about these may be obtained from one priest, minister, or rabbi. Which reminds me of the story of the priest, the minister, and the rabbi who walked into a bar. No, just kidding. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. Okay? By the way, the R in rabbi is small r, no capital. Same for priest and minister, which is interesting. The reference to consulting with one's rabbi most certainly catches the eye. But that is not even what makes the above quoted passage so telling. The Talmudic way of studying things is first to see what it says, and secondly to see what it doesn't say. Oh, yes, it is rather remarkable considering that these words were written when the program was not even 4 years old, and hardly any Jews had joined the ranks of the fledgling organization. However, a far more compelling argument against sectarian classification of the Big Book is to be found in what the above quoted line does not say. While this passage clearly conveys a favorable attitude toward one, religious affiliation, so if you're in the program and you live a spiritual program, we encourage you, we hope that you are affiliated religiously. That's a good thing. Number 2, communal prayer, which means not only that we should pray at home alone. Our spiritual prayers of the 12 steps, the 11th step, sought through prayer and meditation, but we should also engage in communal prayer. Go to places where your religious groups gather in the morning and pray with them. And number 3, religious study. It tells you there's other books besides AA that can help you with the ideas discussed in this book of AA. So go speak to your minister, your priest, or your rabbi and ask them for a book, a religious book, because you're going to a religious person, that will help you better understand and better practice the 12 steps, the spiritual program. So although this is true, it is at the same time abundantly clear that the institution of religion is seen as something separate from, even if complementary to, the program. It's just one paragraph. It says, besides doing all the things that we do in the program, there's also something called religion. And over there you can get some extra stuff too. And in other passages in the big book, it talks about how this institution called the medical field. And if you need help from there, go and get help from there. Which means that the program is not against medical attention, and medical attention can complement some parts of the program. We do not endorse any specific medical treatment, and we're not against any specific medical treatment, just like we're not against anything or for anything. And same goes for religion. We're not for or not against. One of the suggestions of the big book is that it would be a good thing for a person who's spiritual to bring that spirituality in their religion and to bring their religion to their spirituality, which is what we talked about last week, about the spirituality of Judaism and the spirituality of the 12 steps. And how this group, Judaism in Recovery, and this place, the French House, and this book, God of Understanding, attempts to find what is similar in those two forms of spirituality, and that each form of spirituality enhances the practice of the other form. So that if I am practicing Jewish spirituality, by incorporating the spirituality of the 12 steps, I am enhancing my Jewish spirituality. And if I'm practicing 12-step spirituality, then by incorporating the spirituality of Judaism, I am enhancing my spirituality of my 12 steps. From this reading and many passages like it, I skipped a line. It is evident that the program's authors envisioned the distinct possibility that members of their spiritual group might very well be people who would pray daily and yet not affiliate with any religious orders. It's an option. The religious thing is an option. From this reading and many passages like it in the big book, it becomes obvious that the distinction between religion, quote, and spirituality, quote, that is routinely emphasized by members of 12-step groups today is not a mere construct retrofitted to the program lately as some suspect it to be, but an underlying principle firmly rooted in the movement's original text. From the beginning, from the get-go, as far as we're not going to talk about the AA as a fellowship, but as far as the big book is concerned, and the program that was written in it, it was definitely not part of any religious group. Now, the author over here goes and gives us a little hint why it's important to have this distinction. By the way, do you know what the distinction is? Religion, say the 12 steppers, is for people who don't want to go to hell. Spirituality is for people who've been there. The point is like this. Facts are that a lot of people who are in their addiction and even in the early stages of their recovery, they have had bad experience with religion. Bad experience with authority figures. Bad experience with organized religion or any other organized groups that deny them their attention, deny them their respect, deny them their rights. And being very sensitive, we rebelled against those institutions. We rebelled against religion. And by proxy, we rebelled against God. Because we associated all of these concepts that made us uncomfortable, and we blamed it all on God. And I'm not making it, this is in the big book, all of this. So when we come and we tell a person, what hurt you the most is going to heal you, I'd say, I'd rather not get healed. If I need to go back to religion in order to recover from my addiction, I'd rather stay an addict. Now, we're not hiding the religion under the guise of spirituality. No. When we say, you don't need religion to recover, you just need spirituality, it is not because we're trying to get you into the spirituality and then we'll hook you in eventually into the religion. No. When we get you into spirituality, we relearn a new relationship with God, a relationship that is existing in religion, that's supposed to exist even in organized religion, but that sometimes is not experienced by us. And that little thing is called spirituality. Most of us who rebelled experienced no spirituality at all in our religion. We experienced hell, or the fear of hell, or the threat of hell. Our religion was void of spirituality. No wonder we ran away. Recovery is reintroducing spirituality. It is not concerned about our religion. It is concerned about our spirituality. When we have spirituality in our lives, and when eventually we grow in a spirituality and we recognize that this spirituality is also connectable to our religion, also connectable to our God, and we're going to talk about in the next part of the introduction about what that God is, then we have a whole new relationship with those institutions that we rejected. And eventually, yes, we might get religions back. Actually, the trend is that people in recovery usually get closer to that religion also. But that's not because the spirituality is religion in cover and hiding. It is because the spirituality allows us to re-experience an old experience that we had as negative and re-experience it as positive. When I sit in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and I say, our Father, our King, I don't have to imagine the fire and brimstone and the king with a pen going to sign you in the book of death. I have God of my understanding, God of our understanding, which we'll discuss in the coming weeks. And this God of our understanding allows us to sit there in synagogue and have a new image of God. And sit in synagogue and read the same book and have a new meaning of what those words mean to me. It allows me to practice Shabbos and to do other things infused with a meaning that I never had. And also with a desire and a passion that I never had. I don't have to do something that someone else wants me to do. I don't get punished if I don't do it. I get to be excited of being part of a spiritual experience, whether it is in a religious setting or not. So that's all for this week. Thank you very much for participating, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.